Good morning, how are you? Today we will study story The Prince and the Pope, chapter 9, page 20. But before starting to read chapter 9, I will remind you with some of the most important points that we studied during chapter 8. Let's start. Edward was strong when he looked into the soldier's eyes, and he didn't run away when the crowd looked dangerous. Miles Hendon stood in front of Edward and fought the angry crowd, but the crowd was big and Miles was only one man. Miles Hendon was one of the king's soldiers. He arrived back from France yesterday. He was on his way to his country house. He fought in France for his country for 7 years. Then he came home and a London crowd wants to kill him. Lord Hertford climbed down from his horse and ran up the stairs to the doors of the guild hall. He went to Tom and told him that the king was dead. Now open your books, chapter 9, Edward, King of England. Miles had a room near London Bridge. He took Edward there. They heard shouts in the streets behind them, but they didn't understand the words. Then the shouts came nearer. King Henry is dead. Poor Edward. He thought of his father. Henry was a difficult man, but he was always kind to Edward, and Edward wasn't with him at the end. The boy started to cry. He thought of Lady Elizabeth and Lady Jane, and he wanted to be with them. Then they heard more shouts. Long live King Edward the Sixth. When he heard those words, Edward felt strong again. So now I am king, he said quietly. Now, what did Edward feel when he heard that the king was dead? Edward thought of his father. Henry was a difficult man, but he was always kind to Edward, and Edward wasn't with him at the end. The boy started to cry. He thought of Lady Elizabeth and Lady Jane, and he wanted to be with them. Next, Prince or King, said Miles, you can stay here with me tonight. But suddenly a man stood in their way. So you are here? Said John Canty. He took Edward's arm, but Miles Hunden put the boy behind him. He stood face to face with John Canty. Who are you, sir? What do you want with this boy? He is my son. Are you his son? Do you want to go with this man? Miles asked Edward. No, no, he isn't my father. I will die before I go with him. Then you will not go with him, said Miles. Oh, but I think he will come with me, said John Canty. Miles put his hand on his sword. Do you want to feel my sword? It killed many men in France. It works in England too. Canty moved away and they couldn't hear his words. Go, shouted Miles, and never come near the boy again. Miles took Edward up to his small room. There was a bed, two chairs, and a table. Edward fell on the bed. Call me when the food is ready, he said. Miles laughed. Yes, your majesty, he said. I will order a banquet from your servants. But Edward didn't hear him. He was asleep. Miles went down to the kitchen and brought food up. to the room. He woke Edward. Now, how was Miles kind to Edward? Miles was kind to Edward because he stood face to face with John Canty and he saved Edward. After that, he took him to his room and brought food for him. Next, your banquet is ready, Your Majesty, he said. Come and eat. Edward washed his hands and sat down at the table. Miles sat down too. Wait, said Edward, stand up. I am your king. Wait for my orders. Miles stood up. Now, please sit. Miles, Miles smiled and sat. They started to eat. Now, Miles Hendon, said Edward, tell me about your life. Well, my home is Hendon House in Kent. My father is Sir Richard Hendon, a rich and important man and a friend of King Henry. He is a good man. I have a younger brother, Arthur. He is very different from father. Now, what did Miles say about his life? Miles said that his home is Hendon House in Kent. His father is Sir Richard Hendon, a rich and important man and a friend of King Henry. He is a good man. He had a younger brother, Arthur. He was very different from his father. Next, Arthur wants Hendon House and my father's money. He also wants Lady Edith, but she is my love. So Arthur told my father bad stories about me. My father didn't listen to me and he sent me away. And now, 7 years later, I am in England again and near Hendon House, my family and Edith. I know that my father will be happy. We will be friends again when he sees me, but I don't think that Arthur will be very happy. I will not be kind to your brother, said Edward, when he heard this, this story. He will have to leave Hendon House. You are good to me, and I will look after you well. Give me your sword, bow to your king. I name you Sir Miles Hendon. Now you are one of my men. Now, what did Arthur do with Miles? Arthur wanted Hendon House and his father's money. He also wanted Lady Edith, but she was Miles' love. So Arthur told his father bad stories about Miles. His father didn't listen to Miles and he sent him away. And now, 7 years later, Miles was in England again and near London and near Hendon House, his family and Edith. Next, after their dinner, Edward fell asleep again with his head on the table. Miles carried him to the bed. Poor boy, he said, he has funny ideas in his head. Sleep will be good for him. Perhaps tomorrow he will remember that he is Pauper and not a prince. The next morning, when Miles woke up, he looked at Edward in the daylight. The boy's clothes were very dirty. I think that I will buy my prince some new clothes, he said, and he went out. When Miles came back an hour later, he went into his room, but where was Edward? Now, Miles was kind to Edward. How? Miles was kind to Edward because he stood face to face with John Canty and he saved Edward. And he took Edward to his room and brought food for him and bought some new clothes too for Edward. Next, Miles ran down the stairs and asked one of the servants, "A young man came here," answered the servant. "He said to me, 'Tell the boy this. Meet Miles Hendon in Southwark. Come quickly.' So I told the boy and he went. I think the young man's name was Hugh. That man, John Canty, thought Miles. He sent this Hugo. The boy is in danger." Miles took his things and paid for the room. He got his horse ready and started on his way to Southwark. Now, why was the boy in danger? The boy was in danger because John Canty sent Hugo to Edward to deceive him by using Miles' name, and the boy was in danger because he didn't want to go to John Canty because John Canty wasn't Edward's father. Next, let's answer some questions. Number one, he sent this Hugh. The boy is in danger. Who said that? Miles Hemden said that. B. Who was he? He was John Canty. Why did he send Hugo? He sent him because he wanted to deceive Edward and to tell him to come quickly to meet Miles Hendon in Southwark. It was a trick. He wanted to return Edward because he thought he was his son Tom. D. Why was the boy in danger? The boy was in danger because he didn't want to go to John Canty. He wasn't Edward's father. Now complete. John Canty took Edward's arm, but Miles Hendon put the boy behind him. He stood face to face with John Canty. Miles said, "Arthur wants Hendon house, right? And my father's money, very good. He also wants Lady Edith, but she is my love." Excellent. We have finished. Thank you. Hoping you enjoyed the chapter. Goodbye.